Have you ever stared at your paycheck and just wondered, is this really what my work is worth? It's a question pretty much all of us ask ourselves, and you know what? The answer is way more fascinating than you might think. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the powerful and sometimes hidden economic forces that actually decide what you earn. Okay, let's get into it. First things first, let's talk about the stakes here. This number, $1.2 million, that's the average extra cash a college graduate can expect to earn over their lifetime compared to someone with a high school diploma. So yeah, understanding how all this works isn't just some boring academic exercise, it has a massive real-world impact on all of our lives. So that brings us to the big question. What really sets the value of your work? Is it just about how hard you work or how much you produce? Or are there other, bigger forces at play? We're going to break this all down by looking at it from three different angles. First, the simple, ideal economic model. Then, the role of power. And finally, the impact of society itself. All right, so to start, let's look at the textbook version of how labor markets are supposed to work. This is the simplest, most ideal model out there, and it's all built on one single core principle. Okay, the main idea here is actually pretty straightforward. An employer is never going to pay you more than the value you bring into the company. It just makes sense, right? Think of it this way. If you're a salesperson and you bring in a $1,000 deal, your boss will be thrilled to pay you commission, but they're not going to pay you more than that $1,000. That's the basic logic behind what economists call marginal productivity. Let's make this real. Imagine a tiny widget factory with just one machine. The first worker you hire, they're amazing. They can churn out 4 widgets every hour. But now you hire a second worker. Well, things start to get a little crowded. They have to share that one machine, so the extra output that second worker adds is only 3 widgets. Add a third worker, and it's even more chaotic. They only add 2 more widgets to the total. This is a classic case of what's called the law of diminishing returns. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Let's say each one of those widgets sells for $4. Suddenly, we can put a real dollar amount on what each worker is bringing in. That first worker is a superstar, adding $16 in value every single hour. The second worker, still a great hire, adding $12. But that third worker, well, they're only adding $8 in value. If you're the employer, this is the number you really care about. So, this all leads to a crucial point. If the going wage for a factory worker in town is, let's say, $12 an hour, the factory will definitely hire that first worker who brings in $16. And they'll hire the second worker, who brings in exactly 12. But would they hire the third worker? No way. Paying them $12 when they only bring in 8 would mean losing money on every hour they work. Simple, right? Well, not so fast. We all know the real world isn't some perfect, clean economic model. What happens when the scales are tipped and all the power is on the employer's side? What if they're the only game in town? That's exactly where we're going next. Okay, so now we're moving from the clean theory to the messy reality. Because in the real world, labor markets are often imperfect, and you better believe that power dynamics play a huge role in what you get paid. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. On the left, you've got a competitive market. Lots of employers, lots of options for workers. Wages get set by good old supply and demand. But on the right, you've got something called a monopsony. Just think of it like a monopoly, but for employers. If there's only one big factory or one hospital in a small town, they hold all the cards. They can set the wage, and your choice is to take it or leave it. And what's the result? Almost always, it's lower wages and fewer people getting hired. And you know, this isn't some newfangled idea. Way back, over 100 years ago, the economist John Bates Clark pointed out this fundamental imbalance. An employer can turn down one job applicant with basically no consequence. But for that applicant, getting that job could mean everything. So how do workers try to even the odds? They organize. By forming a union, all those individual workers can band together and negotiate as one single, much more powerful voice. This whole idea of collective bargaining is designed to level that playing field, to push wages back up closer to where they might be in a truly comparative market. But here's the thing. What if the deck is stacked against you before you even walk into that job interview? That's where our third and final piece of this puzzle comes in, the incredibly powerful and often invisible influence of society itself. This chart shows us a reality in our labor market that's been around for a long, long time. So if we set the average earnings of a white male worker as our baseline, that's the 100% bar, we can see that on average, a female worker earns about 82% of that, and a black male worker earns around 75%. Now, these gaps have gotten smaller over the years, but they are clearly, stubbornly still there. So you see a gap like this, and the immediate question is this all just because of active, blatant discrimination from employers? It's a tempting conclusion to jump to, but the real story, as it so often is a lot more complicated than that. So, what is really going on here? Well, it's a very complex mix of things. For the gender pay gap, a huge factor is something called the motherhood penalty. That's the career setbacks many women face after having kids, which is often tied to taking on a bigger share of household work. And the racial pay gap has deep, deep roots in historical inequalities, things like unequal access to good schools and housing that create disadvantages long before someone even starts looking for a job. Now, let's be crystal clear. This does not mean discrimination in hiring and promotions isn't a real problem. It absolutely is. But it's just one part of a much bigger, more complicated story about how our society is structured. So, after digging into productivity and power and society, let's bring it all home and put the complete picture together. So at the end of the day, what's the bottom line? It's this. Your paycheck is really a combination of these three big things. First, there's your productivity, the actual value you create. Then there's power dynamics, your ability to negotiate for your fair share of that value. And finally, there are all those societal factors, the invisible currents that can either help you along or hold you back. All three of these come together to determine what you earn. And that brings us to one final thought. As technology like AI and automation continues to completely redefine what productivity even means, the other two parts of this equation, power and society, might become more important than ever. It really leaves us with a question to chew on. In the economy of tomorrow, where should we, and you, focus our energy to make sure everyone gets a fair shot?